Most people think Zachary Quinto became famous overnight. Sylar in Heroes, Spock in Star Trek, instant stardom. But the truth? Before Hollywood knew his name, he almost disappeared. Years of rejection, doubt that nearly ended his career. One choice that could have erased everything. Instead, that choice turned him into more than a star, an icon who rewrote Hollywood's rules. And to see how, we have to go back, long before the lights, to where his story truly began. He wasn't born into Hollywood lights or red carpets. Zachary Quinto grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, in a home that knew both love and loss. His father passed away when Zachary was only 7 years old, leaving his mother to raise 2 sons on her own. That kind of absence, it doesn't just disappear. It shapes you. For many kids, grief like that could be crushing. For Zachary, it became fuel. He found escape in theater. On stage, he could set his own pain aside, step into another life, and for a moment live inside someone else's skin. Theater wasn't just a hobby. It was a lifeline. By high school, people started to notice. He wasn't just another teenager memorizing lines. He transformed. His posture, his voice, his energy, everything shifted when he stepped into character. Teachers pulled him aside, saying, "You've got something rare." He won awards in local competitions. Audiences leaned forward when he performed. Whispers started to spread. This kid's going places. And maybe Zachary felt it too. He was aiming higher than the school auditorium from the very start. That dream carried him to Carnegie Mellon University, one of the most competitive drama programs in the country. If high school had made him stand out, Carnegie Mellon pushed him to blend in, because suddenly everyone around him was talented, ambitious, hungry. It was a pressure cooker. Students broke down, some quit. But Quinto thrived. He sharpened his instincts. He built stamina. He learned that in an industry where 1,000 doors slam shut before one cracks open, you keep knocking anyway. Then came Los Angeles. Graduation didn't deliver a Hollywood contract. It delivered rejection. Casting calls where he blended into a sea of actors who looked just like him. Days spent waiting in crowded rooms only to be dismissed in 30 seconds. The roles he did get, they were forgettable. A nameless agent leaning against a wall, a background student with 2 lines, a tech guy who pops up just long enough to mutter, "The system's down," before the camera moves on. Roles so small, your mom has to pause the DVR and yell, "That's him, rewind, rewind." But Quinto never saw them as meaningless. Each set was a classroom. He studied how the veterans worked. He watched the directors. He treated every fleeting moment as practice, not punishment. He wasn't just waiting for a break, he was preparing for one. And in 2006, that break finally came. NBC launched Heroes. The timing was perfect. The world was obsessed with superheroes, but Heroes wasn't about spandex and capes. It was darker, edgier. A story of ordinary people discovering extraordinary abilities. And hidden inside that story was a character named Sylar. On paper, Sylar wasn't meant to be much, just a shadowy villain, a side note. But the moment Zachary Quinto stepped into the role, everything changed. His Sylar wasn't loud or cartoonish. He was still, calculating, dangerous in a way that made you lean closer to the screen even as your stomach nodded. One moment, he looked almost vulnerable, like maybe you understood him. The next, he snapped, unleashing violence so sudden it left viewers stunned. He wasn't just playing evil. He was redefining what a TV villain could be. Audiences were hooked. Critics praised the nuance. Writers tore up scripts just to expand his part. Before long, Sylar wasn't just a name in the credits. He was the pulse of the show. Entire story arcs bent around him. Fans filled online forums debating his motives. Monday mornings in offices and classrooms sounded the same everywhere. "Did you see what Sylar did last night?" And just like that, the kid from Pittsburgh, the boy who once disappeared into background scenes, was now the face people feared most on television. For Zachary Quinto, this wasn't just a role. It was a transformation. The world finally saw what he'd been preparing for all along, and Hollywood, for the first time, couldn't look away. After Heroes, Zachary Quinto wasn't just another TV actor. He was Sylar, the villain people couldn't stop talking about. But Hollywood has a short memory. One breakout role can make you a star overnight, and it can also make you yesterday's news just as fast. The industry is full of actors who burned bright for a season and then vanished. The question hanging over Quinto was simple. What comes next? The answer arrived in 2009, and it came with pointed ears. J.J. Abrams had announced he was rebooting Star Trek, one of the most beloved franchises in science fiction. The task was enormous: revive a cultural institution, satisfy the die-hard fans, and attract a brand new audience who had never seen Kirk, Spock, or the USS Enterprise. When Zachary Quinto was cast as Spock, the reactions were immediate. Some fans were cautiously hopeful, others were flat-out skeptical, and many were fiercely protective. Because Spock wasn't just a character, Spock was Leonard Nimoy. For more than 40 years, Nimoy's Spock had been more than a Vulcan science officer. He was logic, discipline, restraint. He was the bridge between alien and human. The ultimate outsider who showed audiences that being different could also mean being powerful. To fans, Spock was sacred. And now here came Zachary Quinto, the guy who played a serial-killing villain on Heroes, about to inherit that legacy. The pressure was unlike anything he had faced. He poured himself into preparation. He studied Nimoy's cadence, his posture, the way he could say everything with just a single lifted eyebrow. But Quinto wasn't trying to mimic. He wanted to honor the original and still create a Spock who belonged to this generation. When the film premiered in 2009, all those doubts melted away. Quinto's Spock was sharp, controlled, endlessly logical, everything Nimoy's Spock had been. But there was more. Beneath the calm, he revealed conflict and vulnerability. A man divided, torn between Vulcan discipline and human emotion. That depth gave the character a new edge, and it gave audiences a reason to connect in ways they hadn't before. The movie itself was a triumph, nearly $400 million worldwide. A franchise revived, a new generation hooked. And for Zachary Quinto, it was life-changing. Overnight, he wasn't just Sylar anymore. He wasn't just a TV actor, he was Spock. And being Spock meant global recognition. His face was on billboards, in magazines, at conventions filled with fans dressed as Vulcans and Klingons. He had crossed over from cult TV fame to international stardom. The sequels only cemented that status. In Star Trek Into Darkness 2013, Quinto's Spock wrestled with darker choices, clashing with Benedict Cumberbatch's villain in scenes fans still replay. By Star Trek Beyond 2016, his Spock had matured, no longer just inheriting a legend, but fully embodying it. By then, no one questioned if Quinto belonged. He was Spock. And behind the camera, something even more meaningful was unfolding. Leonard Nimoy didn't just step aside. He stepped in. He embraced Quinto, mentored him, befriended him. Their bond became deeply personal, a mentor, a father figure, a friend. Quinto later admitted, having Nimoy's blessing gave him the courage to play the role without fear. To know that the man who defined Spock for decades trusted him, that was priceless. For audiences, seeing both Spocks, old and new, on screen together was unforgettable. It wasn't just casting. It was symbolic. The past and the future, side by side, the torch being passed. Those years transformed Zachary Quinto. He had gone from a kid hustling for background roles to carrying one of cinema's most iconic characters. He had the critics' respect, the fans' love, and Leonard Nimoy's trust. But success on screen was only part of the story. Because while Quinto was playing an alien forever, torn between two worlds, in real life, he was preparing to reveal a truth of his own. One that would take just as much courage as stepping into Spock's shoes. In 2011, Zachary Quinto came out publicly as gay, not with a red carpet announcement, not through a glossy magazine cover, not with a carefully staged Hollywood exclusive. He did it quietly, in a blog post on his website. Simple, personal, honest. The timing was powerful. Just weeks earlier, the suicide of 14-year-old Jamie Rodemeyer had shaken the country. Bullied relentlessly for being gay, Jamie's death was a reminder of how silence can cost lives. Quinto read the story and felt it like a punch to the chest. He wrote that he couldn't stay quiet anymore. Silence, he said, felt like complicity. Those closest to him weren't shocked. Family, friends, many colleagues already knew. But to the millions who only saw him as Sylar or Spock, this was a revelation. And in 2011, choosing to live openly was still a decision loaded with risk. America was split. Same-sex marriage existed in only a handful of states. Don't ask, don't tell had just been repealed. Polls showed opinion slowly shifting, but not enough to guarantee safety. Hollywood, despite its liberal face, still sent quiet warnings to actors. Don't make yourself uncastable. Don't close doors before they open. Don't give studios a reason to hesitate. Quinto had heard all of it. He knew how quickly careers could shrink, but he also knew the weight of silence. So he pressed publish. In that single act, he reframed how the world saw him, not just a performer, but a man stepping forward with truth. The reaction was swift. Headlines circled the globe. Social media filled with support. LGBTQ organizations praised the decision, and countless fans expressed relief and gratitude. What struck most people wasn't simply that another celebrity had come out, it was who. This was Spock, the face of a billion-dollar franchise, tied to characters defined by strength, logic, and difference, saying openly, "This is who I am." To young queer fans, it meant visibility and hope. Proof that even in Hollywood, where image is everything, honesty was possible. What made the moment even more powerful was what Quinto chose to do afterward. He didn't treat his announcement as the end of the conversation. He leaned into it, speaking about bullying, suicide prevention, the responsibility that comes with visibility. His interviews weren't rehearsed speeches. They were candid, thoughtful, sometimes emotional. He wasn't positioning himself as a spokesperson. He was simply refusing to be silent. Hollywood noticed. So did fans. His authenticity resonated because it wasn't branding, it was lived experience. That sincerity gave every word weight. Questions still lingered. Would audiences accept him as a romantic lead? Would studios hesitate to cast him in blockbusters? These concerns were real. But Quinto kept working, and the collapse never came. If anything, his career grew steadier, his presence more commanding. Without the burden of hiding, he had more energy to give to his craft, and it showed. The change was liberating. No more dodging questions in interviews. No more cautious half-answers about dating. No more second-guessing before stepping onto a red carpet. He could just live. And that freedom translated into a presence that felt stronger, lighter, more assured. Audiences saw it too. He wasn't only Sylar, the chilling villain. He wasn't only Spock, the Vulcan torn between two worlds. He was Zachary Quinto, the man who used his voice when it mattered, who proved that honesty could be as powerful as any role. That year was a turning point. He became more than an actor. He became a symbol. Proof that courage doesn't just belong to fictional heroes. It belongs to those willing to tell the truth, no matter the risk. And while his coming out was deeply personal, its ripple effect stretched far beyond Hollywood. It gave strength to people he would never meet and added his voice to a movement still fighting for recognition and equality. For Zachary Quinto, choosing honesty wasn't the end of his story. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one where the man and the advocate could no longer be separated. Because now, Hollywood didn't just see a star. The world was starting to see something bigger. A voice, steady and unflinching, for a generation still waiting to be heard. But even as his public role grew, Quinto never allowed it to overshadow the work itself. If anything, the years after his coming out became some of the most prolific of his career. Years that showed he could move fluidly between television, film, and theater, refusing to be defined by any single character or label. In 2011, he stepped into American Horror Story, Ryan Murphy's twisted anthology that quickly became a cultural phenomenon. First came Murder House, where Quinto played Chad Warwick, a man whose death left him bitter, haunted, and sardonic. It was a small role, but memorably unsettling. His sharp edges and wounded energy added layers of tension to the show's already dark atmosphere. Audiences who had just seen him as Spock were now watching him unravel as a ghost trapped in resentment. The contrast was startling, and that was exactly the point. Then came Asylum, 2012, where Quinto went even further. Cast as Dr. Oliver Thredson, he began the season as a seemingly kind, rational psychiatrist, a figure of order in a chaotic institution. But as the story unfolded, that polished exterior cracked, revealing a sadistic killer. His calm precision made the reveal all the more terrifying. One moment he appeared gentle, even sympathetic. The next, he was chillingly methodical. Critics praised his ability to balance empathy with menace, and fans still rank Thredson among the show's most unforgettable villains. By 2013, Quinto had proven once again that he could shift from sympathetic to sinister with unnerving ease. Film offered a different test. In Margin Call, 2011, a tightly wound drama about the 2008 financial crisis, he played Peter Sullivan, the young analyst whose discovery sets off the chain of panic inside an investment firm. Surrounded by heavyweights like Kevin Spacey, Stanley Tucci, and Jeremy Irons, Quinto didn't fade into the background. He anchored the story. His performance gave the film its moral spine, and critics noticed. The movie earned an Oscar nomination, while Quinto earned recognition as an actor capable of standing toe-to-toe with the industry's most seasoned talents. For an actor often associated with genre work, it was proof he belonged in serious, character-driven drama. Years later, Oliver Stone's Snowden, 2016, gave him another chance to inhabit a role rooted in reality. Playing journalist Glenn Greenwald, Quinto captured the urgency of a man determined to shine light on secrets governments wanted buried. His restless energy, sharp intensity, and conviction reminded audiences that truth often depends on those willing to confront power directly. Again, he wasn't chasing visibility for its own sake. He was choosing stories that carried weight beyond the screen. And all the while, he returned to the stage, the place where his journey had begun. Theater offered something no set could replicate: the raw electricity of live performance. In Tony Kushner's Angels in America, he delivered one of his most acclaimed performances, embodying the heartbreak, rage, and resilience at the core of the play's exploration of AIDS and identity. Critics called him fearless, audiences called him unforgettable. For Quinto, it was both art and advocacy, breathing life into a story that had defined an era of queer struggle and survival, while still resonating with new generations. He didn't stop there. In The Best of Enemies, a play centered on political and ideological clashes, Quinto once again showed his range. Whether on Broadway or the West End, he demonstrated an ability to command the stage with the same intensity he brought to the screen. Night after night, he proved that his craft was not just adaptable, it was unshakable, rooted in a discipline that had carried him from high school stages to the world's most respected theaters. By the middle of the decade, the picture was clear. Zachary Quinto was not Sylar anymore. He was not only Spock. He wasn't boxed in by typecasting or by fears that being openly gay would cost him opportunities. Instead, he was building a career defined by choice, depth, and integrity. And with every project, he sent a quiet message. Honesty hadn't limited his art. It had expanded it, giving him the freedom to take risks, to surprise audiences, and to shape a career on his own terms. After years of proving his art could stand on its own, Quinto began to turn that same focus toward something bigger than performance. Fame had given him a stage. The question was, what would he do with it? By the early 2010s, the answer was clear. The platform he built wasn't just for himself, it was for people who didn't yet have one. His first major step came with the Trevor Project, the crisis and suicide prevention hotline for LGBTQ+ youth. Quinto didn't sign on as just another celebrity name. He recorded messages, promoted the hotline, showed up in campaigns, and reminded kids in crisis that no matter how dark it felt, there was a way forward. He often talked about his own adolescence, about loneliness, about searching, and why teenagers needed to hear that their story was only beginning, not ending. Then came the fight for marriage equality. Years before the Supreme Court finally legalized same-sex marriage nationwide in 2015, the battle was bruising. Quinto stood on the front lines, lending his voice at rallies, signing open letters, pushing back against the idea that equality was an abstract concept. For him, it was personal. The right to visit a partner in the hospital, the right to build a family with security, the right to be recognized under the law like anyone else. He stripped the politics down to something simple: dignity. He also threw himself into campaigns around HIV and AIDS awareness. Too often, the epidemic was treated like something that belonged to the past. Quinto insisted it wasn't over. He worked with organizations that promoted testing, prevention, and education. He raised funds. He spoke openly about ending the stigma that still followed the disease. Medicine had made progress, but shame was still killing, and he refused to let the silence return. Public stages became part of his rhythm. At Pride in New York, Los Angeles, and beyond, Quinto delivered speeches that were personal and urgent. Rights, he reminded the crowds, were not permanent. They had to be defended. Younger generations were still at risk of bullying, of rejection, of silence. He didn't speak as a Hollywood star from a pedestal. He spoke as someone who understood what it meant to grow up different, and the effect was electric. That same candor carried on to the stage of the GLAAD Media Awards. These weren't just nights of celebration. They were reminders of the power stories have to shape culture. Quinto challenged Hollywood directly. Representation, he said, wasn't a passing trend. It was survival. A queer character living fully without tragedy could change the way families saw their children. A film that treated identity as human instead of spectacle could reshape classrooms and communities. What set his advocacy apart was persistence. He didn't vanish when the spotlight moved. He supported smaller nonprofits, he visited schools, he used his social media to elevate voices that hadn't been heard. Over time, fans knew. If news broke about LGBTQ+ rights or a young person in crisis, Quinto would say something. Not for a headline, but as a reminder that visibility matters most when it's constant. His image had expanded beyond celebrity. He was still the actor who terrified audiences as Sylar and carried Spock into a new generation. But he had also become a steady presence in the fight for dignity and acceptance. The roles made him visible. The advocacy made him vital. He wasn't just building a career, he was building a legacy that tied art to responsibility. And in the process, Zachary Quinto showed that fame, paired with conviction, could be more than spotlight. It could be shield and beacon at once, protecting those still searching for their voice, and lighting the way for a generation that needed to know it was never alone. By the time his voice had become a fixture in conversations about equality, something deeper was taking shape around Zachary Quinto. He wasn't only a familiar face from blockbusters or acclaimed TV shows, He had become proof that an openly gay actor could thrive in mainstream Hollywood without losing ground. And that shift mattered. For decades, the message to queer performers had been blunt: stay quiet if you want a career. Quinto, by living differently, helped dismantle that idea in real time. What set him apart wasn't just visibility, but the way he carried it. He wasn't loud for the sake of noise or chasing headlines just to stay relevant. Instead, he projected steadiness, a kind of quiet authority. When he spoke, it felt deliberate, grounded, thoughtful. That calmness turned him into a figure people trusted. And for many in the LGBTQ+ community, especially the young, he embodied a model of strength that wasn't about flamboyance or defiance, but something just as radical: being unapologetically himself. In an industry obsessed with image, Quinto became a counter-image, an intellectual, a grounded artist, someone who refused to bend himself into what studios thought a leading man should be. Audiences found him compelling, not in spite of his honesty, but because of it. That made him a cultural bridge, Hollywood on one side, the queer community on the other. Quinto walked between those worlds naturally, proving they didn't have to remain separate. Journalists noticed the shift. Profiles began calling him one of the rare thinking actors of his generation, careful with words, unafraid of hard truths. He wasn't an activist dabbling in acting or an actor dabbling in activism. He was both, seamlessly. That balance gave him staying power. Not a novelty, not a scandal, but a presence people could rely on. Fans noticed too. For queer audiences, his career became a beacon. If Quinto could thrive as himself, maybe their futures weren't as narrow as they feared. For broader audiences, he was proof that honesty doesn't weaken art. It sharpens it. By then, no single role defined him anymore. He had moved beyond Sylar's menace or Spock's logic. What defined him was consistency. By the late 2010s, Hollywood itself was shifting, but his example still stood out. He was one of the few openly gay actors who had not just survived, but flourished in the mainstream. While many were typecast or sidelined, he carried franchises, headlined plays in New York and London, and anchored independent films that earned critical respect. Each success chipped away at the old myth that authenticity and ambition couldn't coexist. Culturally, he became less a celebrity than a symbol. For media, he was shorthand for living openly without losing relevance. For queer youth, reassurance that identity need not be an obstacle. And for Hollywood, proof that audiences don't reject authenticity, they respect it. His influence wasn't built on grand gestures, but on persistence. He didn't reinvent himself with every news cycle. He simply kept showing up, on screen, on stage, in public life, anchored in the same calm truth. That reliability gave him a weight flashier stars often lacked. And in that constancy, Quinto carved out a new archetype. The openly gay A-list actor who didn't need to explain, defend, or soften his truth to fit Hollywood's expectations. He became not just a success story, but a roadmap for other actors, for young people, for anyone told that honesty and ambition couldn't exist together. In the end, Zachary Quinto's influence isn't measured only in box office numbers or awards. It lives in perception, in possibility. He showed that openness doesn't erase opportunity, and that telling the truth about who you are doesn't cost respect. It commands it. And that image, the artist's steady, unflinching, and real, remains one of his greatest roles. Not a performance for cameras, but a life lived as proof that courage and success can walk hand in hand. After years of carving out his place in Hollywood, Quinto shows no signs of slowing down. His recent projects prove he isn't interested in coasting on past achievements. He's still experimenting, still finding new ways to stretch both his craft and the industry that once doubted him. In the early 2020s, more than 15 years after Sylar first chilled audiences on Heroes, he had moved into a new phase. the veteran who still feels restless. Independent cinema gave him that space. In 2023, he starred in Down Low, a dark comedy that premiered at SSW. Small in scale but bold in tone, quirky, twisted, unapologetically strange. Quinto leaned into the weirdness, earning praise for a fearless performance. It wasn't meant to dominate box offices, it was meant to prove he could take risks and make them worth watching. Later that same year came He Went That Way at Tribeca. Inspired by true events, it paired him with Jacob Elordi in a tense story of survival on the open road. Where Down Low reveled in offbeat humor, He Went That Way simmered with unease, showcasing his ability to shift tones without losing the core of his craft. These weren't blockbusters, but that was the point. He didn't need a massive budget to make an impact anymore. What mattered was the chance to play, to take parts that felt alive. Independent films reminded him why he had started acting in the first place. Stories sharp enough to cut, characters jagged enough to linger. Meanwhile, the stage kept calling. In 2023, he returned to Broadway with The Cult of Love, a play about family dynamics and the ties that both hold and tear us apart. Critics praised his layered performance, noting how he slipped from sharp humor to aching vulnerability within a single scene. On stage, without edits or retakes, his precision had nowhere to hide, and didn't need to. Night after night, audiences saw an actor still thriving where it had all begun. Television, though, offered the clearest proof of his staying power. In 2024, NBC announced Brilliant Minds, a medical drama inspired by the life and work of Dr. Oliver Sacks. Quinto was cast as the lead, stepping into the role of a neurologist whose empathy and intellect guide him through extraordinary cases. It marked his first major network TV lead since Heroes, and critics quickly noted how fitting it felt. A series about compassion and the mysteries of identity, anchored by an actor long drawn to characters caught between logic and emotion. For Quinto, Brilliant Minds was more than another credit. It was proof of resilience, evidence that network television still saw him as a bankable star nearly 2 decades into his career. And symbolically, it felt almost poetic. After years of embodying villains and outsiders, here he was playing a healer. Together, these projects form a mosaic of where he stands now. Independent films that let him explore the edges, theater that strips everything back to raw skill, network television that reintroduces him to millions. Each lane different, but all pointing to the same truth. Quinto's career hasn't narrowed with time, it has widened. That breadth is the real story. Too many actors fade once the lightning strike of fame dims. Others cling desperately to a single role. Quinto avoided both traps. By 2025, he stands as a reminder that endurance in Hollywood isn't about constant reinvention. It's about trusting your voice and refusing to let the industry's old rules dictate your choices. 15 years after he first broke through, Zachary Quinto is still here. On screen, on stage, in the cultural conversation. Not a relic of the late 2000s, not an actor defined by one franchise, a figure whose relevance stretches across genres and decades. And with each new project, he reinforces the message his whole career has carried, that honesty, persistence, and craft can build not just stardom, but staying power. Looking back from this moment, Quinto's story reads less like a career trajectory and more like a blueprint. From the kid in Pittsburgh chasing roles that barely had names, to Sylar, to Spock, to Broadway stages, to independent cinema, and back to network television, his path shows how persistence and honesty can outlast trends. But the real legacy isn't just the credits, it's the proof he left behind, that living openly, fully, unapologetically does not close doors. It can, in fact, open them wider. For years, the entertainment industry whispered the same warning to queer performers. Hide your truth if you want to succeed. Quinto defied that rule in real time. He came out when studios still hesitated to back openly gay actors, then carried blockbusters, won critical acclaim, and kept returning to the work that mattered most. The message was impossible to ignore. Authenticity and ambition weren't opposites. They could coexist, and his career became living evidence. What makes his influence lasting is that it goes beyond headlines. He didn't build his image on shock or reinvention. He built it on steadiness, on showing up consistently, on screen and off as himself. That reliability gave weight to his words and shape to his example. For queer youth, it was more than encouragement. It was representation. They could point to a mainstream star and say, "He's like me and he's thriving." That recognition carries a power no award can match. At the same time, his career dismantled stereotypes from inside the machine. He wasn't typecast into caricature or sidelined into niche roles. He played villains and heroes, icons and ordinary men, voices of reason and embodiments of chaos. Each role chipped away at the notion that sexuality dictates what an actor can believably portray. He proved that talent, not labels, is what makes a performance resonate. Culturally, that duality, artist and advocate, became his hallmark. On one side, the Hollywood star with global visibility. On the other, the activist who lent his platform to causes larger than himself. Neither role diluted the other. Instead, they reinforced one another, showing that an actor could be both celebrated and socially engaged without compromise. That balance helped normalize a future where representation in Hollywood wasn't treated as exception, but expectation. His presence shifted not only how audiences saw him, but how they saw themselves. Fans who once felt invisible found validation in his success. Industry peers saw that the old myths about marketability were just that, myths. And even for those outside the LGBTQ+ community, his story modeled a different kind of success. One built not on hiding or reshaping identity, but on embracing it fully. His legacy is already secure, not because of a single performance, but because of the accumulation, the consistency of showing up, the courage of honesty, the craft that tied everything together. His name has become shorthand for something bigger than stardom. Resilience, representation, and the reminder that truth doesn't diminish art. It deepens it. For young actors coming up, his career is a roadmap. For audiences, his work is a touchstone. And for the LGBTQ+ community, his life remains a signal fire, proof that visibility can inspire, that courage can ripple outward, that authenticity can thrive in the very spaces once thought closed to it. That is the descent Zachary Quinto carries forward. Not just the characters he brought to life or the awards and acclaim he collected along the way, but the knowledge he gave to countless others. That living openly doesn't mean giving up your place in the world. Sometimes it means claiming it more fully than ever. And in that, Quinto has already delivered his most enduring role. Not one written in a script, but one lived day by day. The role of an artist who showed that honesty and success don't cancel each other out. They walk together, hand in hand. Zachary Quinto's journey reminds us that truth and art can walk side by side, and that living authentically is not the end of opportunity, but the beginning of something greater. His life proves that courage leaves a legacy far deeper than fame. In celebrating Quinto, we're also celebrating the possibility within ourselves to do the same. If his story moved you, let us know in the comments. Hit like to support the channel, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories of artists who challenge Hollywood and inspire us to live more honestly ourselves.